again.
They didn't just execute you in medieval Europe. They turned your death into a slow-motion public horror show your school textbooks politely skipped over. Picture this. You're dragged through the streets on a wooden sled, tied by the wrists, crowds spitting and throwing rotten food. You can see the gallows ahead, but you're not just going to be hanged. The rope, the wood, the iron, these are only the opening act. What comes next is so methodically cruel that even hardened soldiers looked away. Today you're going to walk through the punishments medieval Europe actually used, step by step, blow by blow. Not the sanitized, off with his head version, but the sickening reality that made people confess to crimes they never committed, just to make it stop. Let's start with the punishment so feared that traitors sometimes killed themselves before facing it. Being hanged, drawn, and quartered. First, you're convicted of high treason, the worst possible crime, a betrayal of king and kingdom. That alone meant you didn't just die, you were turned into a message. Public squares filled with people. This was entertainment, warning, and ceremony rolled into one. You're tied to a wooden hurdle or sled, not allowed even the dignity of walking. Horses drag you over stones and filth to the execution site outside the city walls, because even your blood is considered too dirty for the streets. The hanging isn't meant to kill you outright. You're strung up by the neck, your vision narrows, you feel your body convulse, and then the rope is cut. You crash to the ground, half conscious, lungs burning. That's when the real work begins. Your clothes are sliced open, and in front of the crowd, the executioner opens your abdomen from groin to chest. Your intestines are pulled out and tossed into a fire burning right next to you so you can smell your own organs cooking. Only after this are you finally allowed to die, either from shock, blood loss, or a knife to the heart. Then your body is hacked into 4 pieces, your head spiked on a bridge or city gate, your limbs nailed up in different towns as a permanent rotting billboard. This is what happens if you defy your ruler. Now, if that sounds like the worst thing that could happen, medieval Europe had a chilling answer. Hold my ale. Because in other parts of the continent, they perfected a punishment that turns your body into a macabre sculpture. The breaking wheel. Imagine a huge wooden wheel, taller than a man. You're tied to a bench or a cross-shaped frame. The executioner carries an iron bar or a heavy wagon wheel rim. There's a silence in the crowd. Everyone knows this is going to take a while. He starts with your legs. One smashing blow to the shin. You hear the crack before you feel the full pain. Then the other leg, then the arms. Each limb broken in multiple places, carefully, methodically, avoiding the heart so you don't die too quickly. Once your body's reduced to a twisted, screaming pile of shattered bone and flesh, they thread your limp, broken limbs through the spokes of the wheel. The wheel is then raised up on a pole, like a gruesome windmill made of human agony. Sometimes, if the court wanted to be merciful, the executioner would deliver a final blow to the chest or throat to end it. If not, you stayed there, exposed, broken, and slowly dying of shock, thirst, and exposure. Crows pecked at your eyes. Passers-by saw your skeleton days later, bones still woven into the wood. This wasn't just about killing you, it was about turning your suffering into a slow public exhibition. But not every punishment ended with death. Sometimes the goal wasn't to kill you, just to make you wish you were dead. Take the so-called boot. It sounds almost harmless, like a normal piece of clothing. In reality, the boot was a device designed to turn your legs into crushed pulp. Your shins were encased in a wooden or metal shell. Then wedges were hammered between the shell and your bones. With each hammer blow, the pressure increased. Bones splintered, flesh tore, nerves screamed. There are records of boots so destructive that bone fragments and blood sprayed out of the top. Survivors never walked properly again, if they survived at all. Their ruined legs became a living reminder of authorities' reach. Every limping step an unpaid advertisement for obedience. And that was just one tool. There were thumb screws that crushed fingers into mangled stumps, often used for minor offenses or pretrial interrogations. Tighten, ask a question. Tighten again, ask the same question. Very few people held out for long. Torture wasn't just about pain, it was a way to manufacture evidence in courts that legally accepted confessions extracted under agony. But maybe the most disturbing punishments were the ones that weaponized shame as much as pain. Public humiliation devices that turned you into a living joke, and then often let the crowd do the rest. Take the stocks and pillories. In many towns, you could still see the wooden frames centuries later. Your head and hands were locked in place, or sometimes just your legs, trapping you in an awkward, powerless pose. For hours or even days, you were exposed to everyone. Neighbors, enemies, strangers. People pelted you with mud, rotten vegetables, stones, even excrement. Children mocked you. Your own friends might avoid eye contact, too scared to be associated with you. If the weather turned bad, too bad. You stood there in rain, snow, or blazing sun, ear-pulling, spitting, punches. None of that was officially part of the sentence, but it happened anyway. Society became the executioner's assistant. Now, if your crime offended religion or morality, heresy, witchcraft, supposed sins against nature, the authorities often turned to fire. Burning at the stake wasn't invented in the movies. It was a very real punishment used across Europe. You were tied upright to a wooden post, usually with some mercy options. Sometimes the executioner would secretly strangle you or shoot you before the flames reached you. But that wasn't guaranteed. Fuel was stacked around you: wood, brush, straw soaked in tar or oil. As the fire lit, the heat hit before the flames did. Your skin tightened, blistered, peeled. You inhaled scorching smoke that burned your lungs from the inside. If the flames were slow, you could remain conscious for terrifyingly long minutes as fire crawled up your legs and torso. Crowds didn't always watch in horrified silence. Sometimes they sang hymns, shouted insults, or prayed out loud as if the spectacle was a kind of twisted theater. Yet if fire was too dramatic, boiling offered a different kind of nightmare. Yes, boiling. In some regions and periods, especially for crimes like poisoning or counterfeiting, people were literally cooked to death. You might be thrown into a cauldron of water, oil, or even molten metal, which was then heated. That meant you felt the temperature rise, warmth, then pain, then unbearable burning, until your body finally gave out. Other times you were dropped directly into already boiling liquid. Either way, your death was slow, loud, and unforgettable. But perhaps the most psychologically disturbing punishments were those that pretended to be almost normal things: chairs, cradles, beds, twisted into instruments of terror. Consider the wooden horse or its nastier cousin, the Judas cradle. At first glance, just a wedge or pyramid-shaped device on legs, but you were stripped and forced to straddle that sharp edge or pointed tip with your full body weight focused on one narrow line or spike. Sometimes weights were tied to your feet to pull you down even harder. The point drove up into tender flesh, tearing skin and muscle. This could be used as torture to extract confessions or as punishment on its own. Infection, long-term injuries, and permanent damage to the pelvis or genitals were common. There are accounts where the mere threat of that device was enough to make hardened prisoners confess instantly. Then there was the coffin. Not the one you're buried in after you die. This one you experience while still alive. It was an iron or wooden framework shaped roughly like a human, just large enough to hold you upright. Once locked inside, you were hoisted into the air in a public place. Your arms and legs poked out through openings, sometimes your head too. You couldn't sit, couldn't properly stand, couldn't escape. Birds pecked at you. People threw rocks and insults. You stayed there for hours, days, however long your sentence demanded, exposed to weather and rage until you died of dehydration, injuries, or sheer exhaustion. Your body remained displayed as a final warning. And if you think all of this was reserved only for hardened criminals, remember, medieval law courts did not operate like modern systems. Standards of evidence were different, and torture was often considered a legitimate investigation tool. If you were accused of a serious crime, authorities might test your guilt with pain. Torture wasn't supposed to be used randomly, but once the iron tools came out, procedures on paper meant very little. Very few people could withstand the rack, for example. The rack stretched your body until your own joints betrayed you. You were tied hand and foot to rollers at each end of a wooden frame. Slowly, the rollers turned. Your shoulders dislocated first, then your elbows, knees, hips. Ligaments snapped like overstretched rope. Sometimes the torturer paused, asked a question, then resumed. Dislocated joints might pop loudly. Victims could grow inches taller in the moment, only to be left crippled, nerves damaged, limbs useless for the rest of their short lives. Effects were often permanent, even if the person was never executed afterward. In some inquisitorial systems, confession was considered the queen of proofs. Once you confessed, even under monstrous pain, the law treated that admission as truth. So if your village wanted you gone, if a neighbor held a grudge, or if you were simply unlucky enough to be accused of the wrong crime at the wrong time, the torturer's room became a one-way door. Then there were punishments built on raw fear of impalement, one of the most horrific ways to die that Europe ever employed. In some regions, especially in Eastern Europe, rulers used impalement to send shockwaves through entire populations. You were forced onto a long, sharpened stake, driven through the body, often starting from below, through the anus or groin, and angled upward inside you so that it avoided immediately lethal organs. The stake might emerge from your chest, shoulder, or even mouth. Then it was raised upright. Gravity did the rest, slowly dragging your body down the pole as hours or even days passed. Anyone who saw forests of impaled bodies lining the roads didn't just learn fear, they learned obedience. Medieval authorities understood something modern propaganda also knows. A single dramatic example can control thousands of people. That's why so many punishments were public, theatrical, and visually unforgettable. Executions were scheduled like events. Bells rang, markets paused, people brought their children, rulers, judges, priests, they all relied on the psychology of terror. If the crowd left shuddering and telling stories, the punishment had worked. Not all punishments were bloody though. Some were bizarrely creative, designed to mock as much as to hurt. In some cities, drunkards might be forced to wear barrel-like costumes and paraded around town. Adulterers might be shaved, ridden backward on donkeys, or forced into odd positions in public devices that made them look ridiculous. But just humiliation in the Middle Ages could easily escalate. Crowds didn't always stop at laughter. A thrown stone could become a beating. A beating could turn into an unofficial execution. And what about women? The medieval system had special cruelties for them as well. Women accused of witchcraft, infanticide, or sexual impropriety might face drowning, tied up and thrown into rivers or ponds. Sometimes this was framed as a test. If you floated, you were guilty and hauled out for further punishment. If you sank, you were innocent, but dead. Even their bodies could be posthumously dishonored, denied proper burial, or displayed as warnings. Standing back from all of this, one thing becomes clear. These weren't random acts of madness. They were part of a system that believed fear kept society in line, a system where pain was policy. So next time you hear the phrase medieval justice, remember, it wasn't just a quick axe swing or a tidy trial scene from a movie. It was a world where ropes, wheels, stakes, boots, and fire were everyday tools of law. Where a bad accusation could end with your body twisted on a wheel above the city gate, your name lost but your bones still telling a story. And maybe the most unsettling part? Many of these punishments weren't abolished because people suddenly became kinder. They faded slowly, replaced by prisons, fines, and more civilized methods like the guillotine. The stage, the crowd, and the spectacle never truly disappeared. Only the props changed. Because in every era, someone, somewhere, decides how much pain the law is allowed to inflict. And in medieval Europe, that limit was pushed terrifyingly far.